Good morning. Tele-warriors are a new soldier born out of the proliferation of unmanned systems at the dawn of the 21st century. Now, Fisher defines tele-warfare as the use of unmanned vehicles, ships, aircraft, weapons, or other devices that are remotely controlled in direct support of military operations. Tele-warriors are therefore military personnel who access the battle space remotely through technological mediation. My thesis will investigate the issue of civilian visibility in telewarfare. Specifically, I'm investigating whether lethal drones and the telewarriors who operate them can discern civilianhood from behind screens and through data. This research problem will be investigated within the context of a specific practice, signature strike. A signature strike occurs when lethal force is used against an individual or group who exhibits suspicious patterns of life that correlates to an imminent threat or insurgent activity. I wish to problematize the notion that the telewarrior can accurately delineate civilian from combatant via such methods. This research project interrogates how scopic regimes are constructed in the context of the United States lethal drone program. A scopic regime simply refers to a constructed way of seeing. Within this research area, I investigate three key questions. Firstly, how are telewarriors captured within a scopic regime? Secondly, how does this process of capture determine the ways in which telewarriors see, perceive, understand, and act? Finally, does this scopic regime render civilian bodies and performances of civilianhood invisible? Advocates of lethal drones position the military practice as efficient, ethical, and surgical. The reality of drone violence is far less so. Between 2005 and 2015, approximately 964 civilians were killed by the United States drone strikes in Pakistan alone. Drone violence continues under the Trump administration, and we know little of the civilian cost. Drone violence is a site of comprehensive scholarly inquiry. I will now briefly review the literature which orbits around my research area. A signature strike is enabled by a patterns of life analysis, which demarcates life as either suspicious or benign. This act of transmuting the racial other into a knowable object has a far-reaching historical continuity. This phenomenon is named by Edward Said as Orientalism and describes a specific relation of power between the West and the Orient. It is one which is characterized by the West exercising a hegemony over the construction of the other. Orientalism is an asymmetrical phenomenon, as the West discursively constructs the racial other. The other does not speak for themselves. Similarly, the subjects of drone violence do not speak for themselves. Derek Gregory asserts that it is the telewarriors who construct targeted bodies as either guilty or innocent, combatant or civilian. Asymmetry also characterizes the materiality of drone violence as a form of combat. Catherine Maurer identifies drone violence as a break from traditional mutual combat. Maurer finds that warfare morphs into hunting. It is therefore no surprise that the two most commonly utilized drones are named Predator and Reaper. Such constructions of the hunter and prey create a dichotomy between the US and the racial other as between civilized humans and savage humans, or more broadly, humans and animals. This dichotomy of hunter and prey, civilized and savage, is a common Orientalist trope invoked to diminish the value of life and justify the removal of legal protections normally afforded to these populations. Prior research has identified where the discursive transmutation of targeted populations and the removal of legal protections intersect within the context of drone violence. Like Catherine Maurer, Joseph Pugliese similarly identifies this Orientalist trope between the West and the racial other as a dichotomy between man and animal. Constructing the racial other as animal life facilitates their subsequent disavowal from a human rights-bearing subjectivity. It places the racial other amongst the historically marginalized, subjugated, and exterminated category of animal life. Joseph Pugliese names this phenomenon ratio-speciesism. Ratio-speciesism enables the construction of bare life. Bare life, theorized by Giorgio Agamben, is that life which exists as human life in a biological sense, but is void of all the normal legal protections afforded to human life. Joseph Pugliese identifies two processes which facilitate the production of bear life. The first of which is the enactment of a ratio-speciesist construction of the racial other. The second of which is the creation of a scientific system by which the surveilled racial other can be objectively known to telewarriors as suspicious and posing an imminent threat. Patterns of life analysis, which are used to prosecute signature strikes, are one of these scientific systems which Joseph Pugliese names the bioinformationalization of life. Life is transmuted into patterns, data, and information. Intelligence, which designates bodies as threatening or benign. If threatening, life is transmuted into bear life and quickly dispatched with. Such suspensions of legal protections occur not only upon bodies. In drone violence, such suspensions occur over entire geographical spaces. Derek Gregory alleges that these areas are discursively constructed as lawless borderlands. These spaces are energized by the Orientalist trope of the uncivilized realm of the savage. Derek Gregory cites the federally administered tribal areas of northern Pakistan as a manifestation of such a space. Gregory invokes Giorgio Agamben's theory of the state of exception, which he surmises as one in which a particular group of people is knowingly and deliberately exposed to death through the political, judicial removal of legal protections. Jane Stack reveals that all military-aged males killed in a drone strike are included in the United States definition of combatants who are considered legitimate targets. This designates the regions and nations where drone violence is prosecuted as a state of exception. The manufacture of a state of exception denies those who occupy these spaces legal protections under laws such as the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law. Prior research has evidenced the historical continuities of drone violence, as well as the numerous transmutations surveilled bodies and spaces are subject to. In my own research, I wish to reorient the gaze towards those who prosecute drone strikes, rather than those who are prosecuted by them. If surveilled bodies are civilian, and in fact actively perform civilianhood, some force must be orienting the gaze of telewarriors for them to see such individuals as hostile and posing an imminent threat. Scholarship is yet to comprehensively interrogate how the gaze of telewarriors are constructed. I claim that hegemonic discourses, which essentialize the racial other as inferior and criminal, as well as the scopic surveillance media by which the telewarrior accesses battle space, produces a scopic regime in which surveilled subjects are always already guilty. This scopic regime manifests in the misidentification of threat and the execution of civilians. I will deploy critical discourse analysis for this investigation. Critical discourse analysis focuses on unweaving the forces which produce truths, normalizes certain identities, actions, and practices, whilst marginalizing others. In order to ground theory and illustrate my argument, I will analyze a case study. My research investigates a fatal drone strike in which a convoy of civilians traveling in 3 vehicles were flagged as enemy combatants by various aerial surveillance parties, primarily the crew of an MQ-1 Predator drone. This strike, which killed an estimated 23 civilians, has attracted much attention from scholars researching the problematics of lethal drones. This is due to the publication of a transcript detailing the communications between the Predator crew, military screeners, and ground forces. Derek Gregory, however, has identified a gap in previous scholarship. He asserts that reading the radio communications transcript in isolation constructs an inaccurate picture of the network of military actors complicit in the strike. Derek Gregory, in his keynote, Sweet Target, Sweet Child, introduces additional evidence such as the military's investigative officer's report, interviews of survivors conducted by Sonia Kennebeck for her documentary National Bird, and communication transcripts from other military parties involved in the strike. This is the communication network using only the original communications transcript. Here is the actual communication network with all the parties involved in the prosecution of the strike. I aim to address this gap, which previous studies have left. However, In order to navigate the sheer volume of information and remain within the scope of this thesis, I have isolated three crucial junctures within the case study where performances of civilianhood are transmuted into indicators of insurgency and imminent threat. The case study will be followed by two chapters. Each chapter will examine one of the two hypothesized forces which augment the gaze of telewarriors and constitute a scopic regime. The first chapter will examine how racisms augment the telewarriors' gaze. The second will examine how interactive digital surveillance media augments the telewarriors' gaze. I claim that it is in their synchronous machination that these forces create a scopic regime in which telewarriors, specifically those gazing upon the three-car convoy on that fateful day in Uruzgan, were unable to recognize performances of civilianhood. I acknowledge that it's very easy to plot well beyond the scope of an MRes thesis. In order to restrict myself, I will focus on a single case study with the hope of developing a theoretical model which can be applied to other cases of mediated and racialized violence. I acknowledge that this case study is dated, occurring over 9 years ago during a different administration. Nonetheless, I find it to be still relevant and the most suitable case study because of the wealth of primary and secondary sources. In relation to my contribution to my discipline and research field, I hope to produce an adaptable theoretical model of how the gaze of telewarriors are apprehended into a scopic regime which makes performances of civilianhood invisible. I wish to apply this theoretical model to other manifestations of mediated aerial violence, especially those which have occurred more recently. The production of a scopic regime challenges the very notion that one can establish criminality and threat within a program of state violence that is the contemporary war on terror and through the eye of the drone. Thank you.